Koi, you're the first one. You want to share the screen, or you're going to be talking? How would you like to present?
I'm just going to talk. Is this okay?
Okay. I'll have the alarm. You'll hear my alarm.
Yeah, I'll be very quick.
Yeah, thank you.
I have a very short story. Should I just begin?
Yes, please.
Okay, all right. So I would like to basically share a love story. And like in all love stories, there's seduction, romance, and disappointment. It began when I was 14 years old. I was leaving junior high school football practice with my best friend one day, and he asked me what I wanted to be when I grew up. I answered very quickly, I wanted to be an architect. I was startled by my own answer. I did not know what an architect was. I turned away from my friend, and as I did, he asked me where I was going. I told him I was going to the library to find out what an architect was. And thus began the seduction. I said yes. At 18, I entered architecture school. In my first semester, I took an architectural history class. In the middle of his lecture one day, the professor stopped, turned around, looking slowly around the room, and then in a slow and somber tone said these words: "Beauty is the perception of the attributes of God." Those words were riveting for me. I was struck. I wanted to know what those attributes were and how to create them, which since that day I've understood God to really mean the ineffable, with one of its major attributes being mystery. The seduction was complete and the romance was on. Unfortunately, my architectural school experience was not a happy one. I was very disappointed by the lack of interest by my teachers in the things and feelings which I was developing interest in. They wanted me to design work that did not match my reality of experience. I wanted the magic of effects. They wanted the logic of causes. I said no, I would not do that. My disappointment in the teaching that was being offered was intense. So at 23, I decided I did not want to be an architect. The architectural world as taught was too narrow. I decided I wanted to be a creative person, capable of designing many things, including but not limited to architecture. I wanted more. I needed more. I needed a tactile intimacy, the light and dark of the unruly pathos of life. So along with architecture as my major love, I also took on several mistresses: poetry, graphic design, photography, film, painting, and furniture, each accessing a different part of the world, a different part of me. I also was not shy in expressing my disappointment to my teachers. They didn't care. They did not have the bandwidth to cover my interests. One afternoon in my last semester during my thesis studio, my teacher told me that there was a dean from another school in our dean's office interviewing students that might be interested in teaching. He suggested, since I had spoken often about teaching, maybe I should go down and get the job. I said yes. It sounded like a good idea. I went into that interview nervous. I was asked why I wanted to teach. I told him of my love of architecture and my disappointment with the narrowness with which it was taught. The need to stimulate curiosity and the awareness of the power of mystery in touching the wonders of the ineffable was missing. I was offered the job. I said yes. Since that day, I've continued to say yes more than no to the opportunities that have come my way. Saying yes, even when I know that I'm ill-prepared, know that I'm ill-prepared. Excuse me, I've lost my place here just a moment. I've essentially never had a career. Instead, I've led a life of kayaka, Kayaka is a Japanese word for the moment that the cherry blossom bud is just beginning to burst open, yielding the cherry blossom so loved by the Japanese. It is the moment of felt, passionate potential. This is what I wish for each of you, not a career, but a life of Kayaka, a sequence of moments of expanding potential. I can recommend 2 things if this interests you. First, develop some hobbies, things that you pursue for personal pleasure and emotional gratification that is independent of architecture. You have to protect your own personal growth and unique sensibilities that can be stunted by getting your emotional gratification solely from the work you're doing for an employer. Second, read one of 2 books by Daniel Levinson. The Seasons of a Man's Life or The Seasons of a Woman's Life. Both are similar. These books lay out very clearly the psychological and emotional phases that all humans go through as adults. Awareness of these phases can help you navigate life's ups and downs. As you close the door on your degree, you have a key to open 2 new doors. I like to think of those doors as a choice between a life of career and a life of Kayaka. One key opens a door to a corridor with bends and turns, and the other opens a door to a labyrinth of unknown potential. For me, I have found the corridor choice to be one of limits, of many thou shalt nots, as written in the 10 Commandments of the Bible. While the labyrinth choice is the choice of a love story, of yes, 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 as spoken by Molly Bloom in the last chapter of Ulysses, as she gives in to the seduction of Leopold. It's your choice. This choice is at its core a choice of lifestyle, of how you want to lead your life. A life which can have a personal sense of purpose and meaning. I hope you choose the labyrinth. Thanks.
Thank you, Koi.
Sure.
That was great. Okay, great. So, I lost my list. Damjan, you're next.
I'm here. Okay, let me just share my screen for a moment. Do you see my screen?
Yes.
Just need to check out one thing. So I wanted to start from, I was thinking, going back to my thesis, I was thinking about what was the most personal, what would be the most kind of, some kind of an origin story, something that I can go back to and maybe unravel the story from. So I was very surprised when I found this book maybe to be at the origin of that story. And I don't know if everyone knows this book from the students. I think it's a kind of a fascinating kind of exploration of what dynamic and intuitive principles of art and kind of visual principles within art are. It's written by Paul Klee. And in this book, he kind of takes his students on this adventure of seeing differently and kind of challenging the conceptual framework of what they think, kind of visual culture is in some ways. It's one of the kind of primary exercises in modern art thinking, I think. So this is the first maybe exercise in this book where it starts from a point or a dot, and then he talks about this idea of how a line basically starts from a dot, where the dot becomes a line through this kind of walking or kind of a free movement in space. So he talks about the walk for a walk's sake, and the mobility agent is a point shifting its position towards, and then the same line can be complemented with other forms and so forth. So he builds this entire pedagogy from this kind of intuitive reading that lies maybe between art and technology. So I was really interested in this book at the time. So, and the other thing I was looking into was I was learning how to program the computer at that time. So I was also fascinated with the idea of randomness and how randomness produces strange readings, you know, how randomness is not theorized in visual arts in many ways. And this slide is maybe an example of my thinking from that time. This kind of analogical comparative method where two ideas that have almost nothing to do with each other, you know, they become kind of strangely related, right? So this is the start of my thesis. I started making a kind of my own software and my own apps as means of exploring what the contemporary drawing could be, right? What drawings are today, much like the Bauhaus faculty was exploring what drawing was 100 years ago. So it was kind of obvious to me that every era has its own tools and that I probably should look into what is there right now. It seemed for me very important to kind of work in this interactive medium so that there is some resistance to the human author, to this idea of the will and what we want and versus what maybe the apparatus or the machine or the software wants. So I made kind of two versions of this software, one in 2D so that I can make many, many drawings. That was important to produce a quantity of different drawings. And one was a 3D kind of version where it was about models, it was about objects, it was about basically 3D stuff. So in this time, I started believing that kind of tools directly shape design thinking. What you can do as a designer is determined by your own tool set. And our tools are mostly given to us either by history or by technology. So that's why it became kind of important for me to explore this idea and try to work out what this means. So also I was really interested in how software user interface becomes a new kind of drawing, right? So not only drawing is not only what is inside the space, these kind of objects, but also the buttons and the sliders, and all of this becomes a kind of a diagram of power relations between things. This kind of new idea of a diagram, maybe. So in that, after I kind of finished these two apps, the user interface and the software manual, I started thinking about them as new forms of project description, or kind of even a strange kind of a cultural architectural text. So at that point, I kind of started thinking about software not as a tool anymore, but software as a platform. Because if you make a tool, the conversation is mostly technical. People want to understand what is behind it. They want to talk about code. They want to talk about these kind of boring things that are not really so interesting. But if you make a platform, the conversation kind of becomes about culture. So a platform is basically a tool that kind of allows for multiple cultural formats to exist, right? It becomes, it's about many things, not just about objects. So for the last part of my thesis, this is the kind of the final 1/3, I started using these two apps to produce many, many objects and then to test, or not to test, but to explore the possibilities of these objects becoming some kind of architectural formats, you know, drawings, model, 3D prints, renders, and so forth. Here are some of the more kind of classical architectural images made from these objects that are extracted all from that software. And then these are some screenshots from a narrative computer game that told a story about these objects. And also I made some videos, you know, inserting these objects into the city of Frankfurt where I lived at the time. Even at one point, I kind of start thinking about a book, and a book from the standpoint not of kind of collecting all that stuff into a book, but the book within its own medium like specificity, which means that it would be about something else maybe, right? So working with formats each in its own way. So these are some like text-based dialogues and speculations between different entities and so forth. So the main thing that I learned from my thesis was the idea of what I call platform thinking, which is what I'm kind of still working on in many ways. And this was maybe like 5 years or 6 years ago. So the so-called career arc. You know, it's not very long, but so after I finished my school, I started teaching, and that's where this book became incredibly useful as a next kind of stepping stone in that way. Especially this the 9 square problem. That's a very famous exercise for the students from the 50s. And I started thinking about this as a platform, this problem being a kind of a teaching space or a teaching platform. And especially this relationship between somehow the constrained space of possibilities, right? And or the constrained space of conditions that Hajduk was setting for his students, and the kind of the explosion of total fluidity that's a possibility space that comes from this, you know, as an effect, as an outcome. So this relation between somehow conditions and these effects, and that we can design the whole spectrum was super interesting. And that's where this project comes from. This software that I designed for my students, it's called Platform Sandbox, which is a continuation of a thesis project. But now it has a new twist because now everything happens within this platform. Nothing is there. There are no outside models, no outside renders. It's like a collapse between production and post-production, and then everything happens there. So all the drawings are screenshots, all the videos are recordings from the platform, and so forth. And what was really great eventually was that what gets produced is this kind of huge space of possibilities, many drawings, and then some of them even end up in some strange way, they end up in museum collections and so forth. So also in the meantime, I was kind of writing about, mostly trying to figure this stuff out and how I can come closer to this idea, how I can understand my own kind of thinking process. And some of that was published in various journals. So this is the most recent one about the Super Studio game that I was working on. And the other aspect is the exhibitions. So this is the latest one that was that featured this work that I showed you from the Super Studio simulation. But this one opened just before the Corona lockdown. So they kind of moved the entire exhibition online, which is really interesting. If you go to the website, you can see this kind of walkthrough. See some also recent. And this is the last project I want to show, which is this kind of game that I made with Casey and John Cooper and Anthony Tran for the Spring Show. And it's in many ways a kind of a continuation of that thinking, but it has also a new component, which is this idea of being both a modeling and a curatorial platform, where players kind of aggregate architectural objects to produce a collective kind of expression of form. So what is really cool for me here is that there is no single kind of controlling author anymore, right? No one is controlling this. It kind of aggregates from multiple kind of individual players. And what I'm thinking right now is this idea of distributed, democratized creativity, and how that becomes maybe the next step in this journey. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Damjan, maybe if you can put the 2 links to the website on the chat, it would be great. So we can look the exhibition. I think it'd be nice. And also the SCI-Arc. Is this an open website for that, the one you just shown? Twitch
Plays Architecture was, I don't think it's up.
Oh no, it was like Sean, it was there only for that moment.
Yeah, but John really knows about that, so maybe if it's
yeah. I saw that there was a link. So, thank you so much. That was amazing.
Thank you.
Okay, great. Our next guest is Zeina.
Hello.
Hi, Zeina.
Hi. So I'm just gonna share. So can you see this image full screen?
Yes.
That's it, right?
Yes.
Yes, we can see it.
Full screen, yeah? Okay. All right, so I'm gonna do something kind of different today, something that I haven't really talked about before or shown in any kind of public forum. So it's an experiment and a little bit personal, so we'll see how it goes. So basically I wanted to start with this image. This is Beirut in 2006, view from my neighborhood. So my first year of architecture, essentially. I have a B.Arc from the American University of Beirut, so I have a kind of professional path in some ways. That's I didn't start with a liberal arts degree. And in some ways, I'm intimately familiar with what it means to become an architect in the midst of an urban crisis, or in this case, a war. So basically, the war started in July, and I started architecture school in September. So what you're seeing here is the different bombings, which lasted about a month. And you're seeing basically that it was concentrated at the south of Lebanon, and then in Beirut, specifically where I was. We ended up, so in the first couple of weeks, we tried to sort of quarantine, and then we ended up fleeing through Syria, through the border of Syria. Where we then witnessed basically on the way the bombings of civilian and basically ambulances. So in some ways, my first 3 years actually were very much a kind of like a series of upheavals and sort of social unrest. Basically, the war ended. I was going to basically go to Paris. My parents insisted that I leave, but I decided to stay in Beirut anyway. I was born in Beirut, but I actually grew up in Kuwait for a few years, and then back to Beirut. And so for me, it was a way to sort of familiarize myself with the complexities of my city, and I wanted to stay and sort of keep going. But over the 3 first years, there were many challenges from assassinations and sort of mini civil wars. And so at the end of my second year in the spring, actually, we had to work from home like you guys for the full semester. And so we didn't have Zoom, but they would send us assignments and we'd sort of like do our best to work on them without any kind of guidance. So I just wanted to quickly, for those of you who don't know where Lebanon is, so here in relation to some of the more familiar European countries, and then you'll see also that it's a coastal country and it's bordered by Syria, Israel, Turkey. And this is Beirut, and this is where I grew up here. This is where I'm from, this zone, which is considered West Beirut. It's repeating. And then the thing that's really interesting and complex about, let's say, the history of that region is that initially in the early 20th century, these countries did not exist. So you have a couple different decrees, let's say, and treaties that came about between 1916 to 1945. Of course, we were also a country that was under Ottoman siege and then colonized by France. So here what you're seeing, basically 1916, the Sykes-Picot Agreement. Basically it's a secret treaty, and you see it's a secret on the map, where between the United Kingdom and France. And so basically they decided, and they sort of in collaboration with the Russian Empire and Italy to some extent, to define their mutually agreed sort of spheres of influence. So A would be France and B would be Britain. And then in 1922, we were colonized by the French, and so the French sort of divided the territory of A even further, and hence Lebanon. And then they were divided by sect. In 1943, we got our independence from France, and these are stories that my grandfather would always tell us, that the Martyr Square, which is sort of the main plaza in Beirut, was full of people celebrating. But little did we know that actually the French had imposed another sort of decree and agreement where they imposed that if they were to leave, that the president would have to be of a certain religion or sect, so Maronite Christian, the parliament would be Shiite Muslim, and then the prime minister would be Sunni Muslim. And this led, of course, to the civil war in 1982 that my parents lived in. And this is the green line. So this is the exact zone where basically West and East Beirut were divided. We grew up in West Beirut, where most Muslim families lived, and the separation ended in '93. This book was, so as I mentioned, I did an architecture undergraduate degree, but I also minored in art history and political science. And this book was really kind of canonical in my understanding of the complexity of the region, but also our sort of relationship between tradition and modernity. And I really like this passage, which to some extent, the writer points to a kind of analogy between the kind of struggles of race in America and the struggles of religion in the Middle East. And he explains how they are very different and how there's a kind of misunderstanding of how the sects are divided in the country. You can read this passage if you want, it's really interesting. And in 2009, I wrote this letter to the president of my university, dear Mr., or I guess the President Dorman, who was an American appointed president, where I basically explained and sort of laid out the problems, the kind of like toxicity of sectarianism on campus. And I call diversity for granted because essentially the administration had made it impossible for us to sort of express our sort of political freedoms on campus. That was not allowed. And so what it did, it created more enclaves and more sort of toxicity on campus. And that got his attention. And then in parallel, I was looking at Johanna and Haji Thomas and Khalil Jorish's work. They are basically conceptual artists and video artists, Lebanese, who documented the post-July War in a film called I Want to See. And they also collected these sort of posters from the walls of the city and the urban fabric of martyrs that were posted up alongside things like these, like basically posters of propaganda, which pretty much this image, I took this in 2009, and it pretty much sort of sums up the city. You have the kind of Ottoman urban fabric in the back, and then posters of propaganda and sort of posters as weapons all around it. And of course, also the bullet sort of war-torn buildings as well. This one was really kind of amazing. It was the first time that I had seen posters of women candidates, so surrounded by highly corrupt leaders, political leaders, let's say, in the country. And if you're interested, actually, Zeina Masri did a really interesting work on posters as weapons in Lebanon. So this is, I took this in my neighborhood. So I became really interested in the complexities of the urban fabric in the city. And it's really interesting, actually, because I don't come from a North American education, the canon and conversations around form were not at all sort of interest. Instead, we had the sort of socioeconomic and political complexities of our city. So I became fascinated with these structures that were abandoned, and but also the layers of collectivity in the neighborhoods. And this one really exemplifies, I would say, Beirut really well. Sort of summarizes, you've got the Lebanese vernacular to the right, 50s modernism to the left, and then neoliberalism in the background. In parallel to my sort of quest in understanding the city, I wanted to get out of the sort of bubble of my country, and I decided to go work for international more European-centric firms, so I can understand like, the different discourses outside the city of my own. So I worked for them in Peru, did a ton of models, and I also ended up at SCI-Arc where they were in Olot, and I had to learn basically Catalan, which is almost a sort of dead language in some ways. And it was a very interesting experience. I worked on the El Croquis, the 162 issue, and on the Soulage Museum and the Row House, which was also in the book. I came back to Beirut and I started to look for my thesis topic, and I became fascinated with this structure. It's basically what used to be a cinema that was built in 1956. And it was torn during the Civil War and kind of left like this untouched for a long time. So what you're seeing here is this sort of egg with a 20-meter deep, literally hole in the city. And the thesis became a kind of performance. There's a lot of questions around preservation and iconicity and why that is that everybody was so fascinated with this piece in the urban fabric. So we organized events and performances inside it. Unfortunately, I don't have a ton of archives because they are at my parents in Beirut. And then when I did my master's later on, the research project kind of extended its life, and it became more of a intellectual question around why we preserve and what does it mean to preserve. And this structure, just so I can give you guys a sense, was not really noticed, but then very quickly in the mid 2000s and late 2000s, groups of young people started to sort of group around it and create forms of sort of belonging and collectivity. And they became really attached to the structure and they wanted to preserve it. But of course, there was no sort of charters that would allow us to sort of argue for the preservation of a modern structure. So I became really fascinated with this idea of the kind of mediated and advertised piece in the city. That the only reason why it's of importance is because it's been photographed so much. Videos, many videos of it have been kind of documented as well. Many articles have been collected. And so my first, so I have two masters, but I only talk about the first one because I think a lot of you have seen my projector series, became basically this book where I collected basically everything I could find that people have written about or documented, from photos to video stills, from newspaper clips or other. And what I was really interested in is the kind of collective fascination with this modern architectural ruin that had little to no value in the eye of basically the discipline and the public as well. And it became very controversial in that sense. So I'm gonna show you, I'm gonna switch my camera and I'll end there. Okay, I'm almost there. Parents, I know. Okay, so here are some of the photos that I showed you of the piece that I had documented. And this is the book. It's the only book I have, actually only copy I have right now. They're all at my parents'. So basically this book became sort of a personal and sort of existential project for me to understand why everybody, is the camera switch working? Okay, yeah. Why everybody
yes, it works.
is fascinated with this structure, and why also I was, when I was much younger, fascinated with it and worked on it. And so basically I called it an attempt at exhausting the egg. So in a nutshell, this structure had many, many nicknames, from the egg to the soap to the bubble. And it was situated in a very kind of dense historic center. So I documented basically how the different temporalities of the site happened. This is the structure when it was built, and the kind of the renders that the Lebanese modern architect proposed at the time. I became interested in, I think I need to fix my mirror. Yeah, that's better. in we, ours, I, mine, and again, how we see ourselves and how we self-preserve ourselves, our collectivity through structures and basically iconic ruins in the city. And I became also interested in just the general everyday language of how people describe this piece, the rumors around it. This is here, you'll see different documentations of the city center from 1812. And then fascinations around archival and what it means to archive buildings as well. And it sort of, in the end, and this is an archive of everything that I had collected about the documentation of this piece in the news. And in the end, what became clear is that my fascination with it were the sort of media and techniques around the egg, not the egg itself, and how they had essentially very deep cultural and political implications. And this became my thesis. So I'm going to stop here. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think another thing, again, great from our conversations is to put it in context to the world of each moment. So I think that was, quite intense. So thank you, Zeina. So we're going to shift to the last one. Shaki, let me go back to gallery mode.
Hi, everyone.
Hi. So yes, so you can share your.
Is full screen on?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. So unfortunately, my trajectory is super long, and a lot of my school work is sitting in storage somewhere. So I'm working off of whatever I could find in the cloud at the moment. So this is 1992 at USC, which is where I earned my B-Arc. It was a 5-year undergraduate program. So what you're looking at is a model, a massing model. And this is not a thesis project, but this is a project from the semester before my thesis. So this project actually ended up informing my undergraduate thesis quite substantially. This is a studio that was taught by Marc Angelil, who I think he's teaching at the ETH now. But at the time, he wasn't around a lot. I think he showed up for studio maybe 3 or 4 times. And he gave us a prompt, a precedent, which was, for me, the Mises Brick House country plan. And we were just to kind of sort of analyze the precedent, produce a model of it, and locate it somewhere in the courtyard at USC. So at the time, we're drawing manually. And there are a few students in the grad school that had access to AutoCAD, but I was very, very sort of enamored by the kinds of drawings that they were doing. So I was determined to make all my drawings look like they were drawn from the computer. So I only used like rotring pens on Bristol paper, which meant that nothing could be erased. So all of my drawings ended up being these layers of information. So this massing model is a kind of a representation of these layers in analyzing that Mies plan. It's then turned vertically, so you're seeing an elevation of it. And when Marc Angelil said to locate the project somewhere in the courtyard, I kind of naively thought locate the model in the courtyard, not sort of like develop a project in the courtyard. So I ended up choosing the corner of a window as a place for the model to exist. And in a way that became the site. So the site wasn't a site, but the site was a place. And so instead of dealing with issues of context and typical site issues, I was dealing with the characteristics of the corner of this window. So this is the second iteration of that drawing, and issues of reflection, gravity, inside and outside were sort of explored in this model. And in the final iteration, which I don't have images of, there's a kind of skin that sort of masks all of the sort of interior components of this model. And in, I think there was no program, but I think during the final review, someone called it a corner house. So that's why I'm calling it a corner house. And the following year was my thesis. So a lot of my thesis comes from the ideas of working from 2D to 3D. And that was sort of implemented into the thesis in the semester after this. So after USC, I ended up working for Daily Genic. Right now it's Kevin Daly Architects, because Kevin is now the principal of KDA, and Chris, I think, is retired. And after having, I think he chaired the undergraduate program at SCI-Arc about 15 years ago. But I was fortunate enough to work on many projects from start to finish. Houses, furniture, installations. But we were using PowerCAD on the Mac at the time. But I was still very determined to try to make drawings look like they were drawn digitally. So this drawing is a perspective, but I'm using Pantone stickers to give it color. And I struggled a lot with drawings like this. And at about, I think it was 1998 or 1997, this book comes out, and I see this project, and I read this text, and I'm suddenly kind of exposed to what's happening in the digital world. So I go to UCLA to study under Greg, because he was teaching there. So I really felt like I needed to sort of extend my education. I went into the MArch 2 program at UCLA, and this was a really bad rendering and surface study, because having been on PowerCAD on the Mac drafting, and then all suddenly being sort of pushed into Alias Wavefront on Silicon graphics machines at the time was really daunting. And I imagine that a lot of MArch 2 students come into the program sometimes and contend with having to learn so many different new tools. I absolutely understand that sort of struggle. And then after UCLA, I ended up working for Greg for 10 years. And a lot of what I worked on is in this monograph. And one of the, it was very invaluable to have worked for Greg for such a long time, but really one of the best parts of it was making friends and connections through all of the people who came through the office, but also all the important figures that Greg was surrounded by. So Florencia and Elena, these were really amazing times, like working on so many different projects together. So when I was at Greg's, I started with the embryological house, worked through the Slavin house, and sort of ended my time there with the Bloom house, which is my house, the house that I live in right now. And then afterwards, Florencia and I, we spent, I think, seven to 8 years working on many speculative projects together, and maybe one built project. And this was a great time of, you know, experimentation, thinking through issues of form and color, and really sort of exercising all of our shared interests in many different projects together. Currently, I'm working on so this is what I'm working on now. I'm working on a very kind of practical project. This is a remodel of a mid-century house, a house by Robert Skinner. And I wish I had this other photograph, but currently the house is a hodgepodge of remodel after remodel. So it was occupied by different, it was basically made into a kind of coke den for a Hollywood producer. But currently the current client wants to kind of not restore it, but kind of bring back a little bit of its original qualities. So right now the house is being stripped, and we're working through basically tearing most of it down to build it back up to its almost original condition. And but also thinking about new materials for this house. So that's the kind of stage that we're at. We're looking at materials, but also because of the sort of pared down details of this house, I'm kind of in this rabbit hole of looking at old inventions of house details, of like baseboards, doors and door frames, to kind of think back to where these house components start, how they got pared down, and then also trying to think about new ways of detailing this house. And that's it. Thank you.
You have 11 seconds.
Made it.
That photo, by the way, she sent it to me before for approval. So I was like, I don't know, Elena, should we burn this?
Yes, I think we're not gonna record this.
No, this is not being recorded, so please.
Not going on the cloud.
Yes, Kyle, keep it in your computer. That cannot go public. So thank you guys. You know, we had 4. I mean, again, I think when you guys take photos now of your studio or whatever office you work on, keep it for a future career day to be like. So thank you guys for the 4 presentations. So today we had you know, we have 4 great presentations from a story. I think, Koi, you should share your text with us as well. And then, you know, the different stories. So I open the floor for questions.
I actually had a question. That's kind of for everyone. It's kind of a general question. This is something that like I've been speaking with Damjan about for sure during my like whole thesis process. But I think something that was interesting that like Zeina touched on, and pretty much everyone touched on, is like the level of like personhood and personalness within architecture. And I think that's a conversation that's been had, that I've been hearing a lot, especially this year and especially now during like this current climate. And I guess I just kind of wanted to open up about like what I think as architects you're taught, at least this has been my experience, to kind of like eschew from making things too quote unquote personal, or like kind of I guess bringing it back into yourself as the actual like designer, and more thinking about who it serves. But I guess I just wanted to ask, like, what do you think, what have you observed as like the change in this kind of I guess development of the personhood, of like the personal within the study of architecture, within the discipline of architecture, and why is it important to bring the personal take into the project or not? And what is the future of that kind of element of architecture?
Maybe I'll start, because I think mine was very deeply personal. It's also, I mean, the presentation today is a little bit vulnerable for me to put together because I've never actually showed this stuff. Part of it because, you know, your career evolves and then your work becomes your work post, you know, post school or post sort of academia, and you mature and sort of things change. But I would say that in some ways the interests remain, like for me, let's say the interests around the sort of psychology of the collective and sort of the cultural influences around how we make things and how we perceive our urban environment, I think is still very much in the practice. Like I was going to show this, which some of you are familiar with, this book that we did. I think I need to change it's mirrored, yeah. Like this book we did in 2014 after I had started my own practice, New Massings for New Masses, in some ways is a kind of more evolved, developed, mature take on some of my interests in the thesis on the egg, where we were interested in questions around like neoliberal concerns in housing, but also more speculative ideas around like collective living and stuff like that, which very much I think ended up emerging in the Story of the Egg project I worked on. I don't know if this is answering your question, but in some ways, like it's almost impossible not to inject your interests and your sort of own background into your work.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's definitely a level to it, is like interest, but I think I also mean, especially now, the importance of using, I guess, your platform for, let's just say, political, speaking on political things, or what you as a person believe is important for like the trajectory of architecture and like the world to go in. Because I do think that there's been a shift like this past few months in like using quote unquote your platform, or taking more initiative on a personal level to kind of have those discussions. So it's not so much like there's no like answer, but I just kind of wanted to like see, I guess, what you guys thought about that kind of trajectory that's happening.
I think that's a very difficult question to kind of answer briefly, you know, because there is one way how we can think about this that has to do with this idea of what an architect can do versus what was traditionally thought that an activist can do, right? And somehow what seems to be happening is that there is a collapse between positions right now. So because we have this proliferation of identities and this kind of explosion of different lifestyles and everything for the last 20 years, which kind of coincides incidentally, right, with the advent of the internet, I think. So my reading would always be to look for the kind of the background story, right, first, rather than to try to understand that on the surface level, which is, you know, I think, I mean, there is also a whole history of the idea of the self that was informed by how capitalism frames that, right? By how a personhood is produced through kind of, you know, the idea of capitalism, for example, and how that became hyper accelerated in the last maybe 20 to 30 years. And that the theory would be that that's because this is why you have these kind of all these exploding ideas of identity and proliferation of different lifestyles and all that. But the real, I think, I mean, this is just a complete speculation. I think the real political power lies, for me at least, within the platform itself, right? The one, it's exactly the same like 100 years ago, who owned the means of production in a factory. That was the real political power, right? And then you have the struggle between like the owners of the means of production and the kind of the working class. And now the struggle is maybe the owners of the platforms of dissemination of information, like Mark Zuckerberg, right? And the people that kind of inhabit that platform, which is all of us basically, and this idea that we work for them, you know. So I mean, these are kind of like things that I'm thinking about all the time, but I don't know if that answers your question or kind of touches upon that.
I don't think it can like be answered. Sorry.
I think it's interesting what you said, Damjan, about
point of view. My point of view would be that architecture is a very, very broad platform for participating in culture. And there are many, many different ways of being architects, from a professional commercial architect to being, you know, avant-garde artist, architect, etc. And the answer to the question for me is really more at the level of person. You have to decide what your gift for life is. And everybody's gift for life is different. And when you know yourself and you know what your gift is, your life takes on real meaning when you give that gift to life. And that's a personal choice, you know, and that has to do with the skills you have and your emotional makeup, etc. Everybody can't be everything, but we all can be our best selves. And to discover that purpose for life is really, really important. And when you discover that purpose for life, your life takes on meaning and you have a sense of accomplishment. If you try to distort that and try to force yourself into a mold which doesn't fit your skill set, your psychological makeup, your opportunities and circumstances in a distorted way, it's really very, very counterproductive to you and to society. Everybody finds their niche. And that's the most important thing. We all participate and share in our gift for life.
I wanted to bring up Greg Lynn real quick. Speaking of niches, seems like a lot of niches with him. But this might be related more towards Jackie, because Julian bringing up personalization, and I was kind of thinking also of customization and how Greg Lynn's kind of been the tip of the spear of customization, especially with Embryological House. And I was wondering, Jackie, if you could speak to what it might have been like in the office as Greg Lynn was toggling between architecture projects, but also like sailboat projects or tableware, or I mean now kind of robots. So could you kind of speak towards that, how maybe the office moved through that as well, kind of these highly customizable projects? And
I think I think your question is assuming that these things were all sort of separate, that like the boat might be separate from the house, or but really like all
in fact,
of those,
no.
Really, I mean, I think all of those things were sort of one, that nothing was really a kind of separate thing. Like one idea led to another. So if an idea about, let's say, customization and variation started in the Embryological House, it would trickle into other projects in other ways. So, and in a way, like, you know, thinking about Damjan's work with randomness, a lot of that thinking may have, I can almost see like how the Embryological House could have ended up with randomization, right, as technology sort of evolves. And so I think in the office, it always felt like one big project, you know, applied to different mediums, applied to different programs and projects.
Zeina, you were going to say something. Do you remember what you were going to say?
Sorry, I lost my connection for a second.
Okay.
You mean like when Julian was asking the question?
Yeah.
Oh, I think it might have been when Damjan talked about activism versus design, which I thought was an interesting duality, interesting way of looking at this. And I think part of maybe the underlying kind of idea in the lecture today that I presented is that to some extent activism does not kind of translate into design or architecture, that they sort of become these parallel projects throughout your trajectory, but that unless you're maybe a lawyer or a social worker, in some ways that activism, at least that would be my position, would not necessarily lead into a clear design trajectory. And that was my struggle. I think maybe something that you guys are struggling with today in this political climate. I think as someone who witnessed all of what I witnessed and grew up in, it was definitely a struggle. How do I, as a designer or an architect, participate in these very difficult, let's say, socio-political questions? And there's no easy answer or sort of direct or instrumental correlation between the two. Really don't think so. But I think ultimately, to go back to Julian's point, you have to position yourself on the spectrum in some ways of like whether you lean more towards someone who might absorb culture or produce culture, or whether you might lean more towards something else in the spectrum, like context or technique or something like that. And to what extent could you then merge all of these, like your interest in media with your interest in context and your interest in formal questions? And many architects have done that in different ways. Like someone like Shumi would always say that architecture must participate in the polemical questions of culture. But of course, many have had very different positions about that. And ultimately what you realize is that there's not really one answer or one way of, understanding how you might, how your work or the discipline at large participates in these personal political questions. And I think that's something that definitely I experienced and sort of tried to figure out when I started architecture. Yeah.
I don't know if there are any more questions. I just wanted to repeat something that Koi said on this question. And I think that, there's no one model that fits all. Well, at least that's a simplification to that answer. And I think that for all of you, that works. We can hear you. You cannot hear me?
Yeah,
you don't hear me? Oh, yeah. Maybe Zeina, yes, maybe Zeina, you have an audio. So what I think that, it doesn't answer the question, but it puts it in your side of the court, I would say. And but in a way, without creating pressure, I would think, but actually making you think a little bit on how you can find a way to voice it. I think that Damjan's project, that was amazing. I think, Damjan, when you're talking about democracy through a platform that you discover and that it's like ubiquitous to the whole world, I would say. So it's available to everybody. So it doesn't necessarily have to be a social program that is set up in a traditional manner, but you can find it, in terms of access, so maybe that, there's one entry into that project.
Yeah, I think every generation has their own, and maybe it's like almost always the same question, which is what can we do as architects, as designers? And I think I totally agree with what Zeina said, is that I think we need to find ways of operating that are not purely about effects, or about like presentation of self. And I know it might sound unpopular to you guys because it just feels better if I say the other thing, right? But I think to kind of engage with like the deeply technical problems that we have in today's world, so climate change and the rise of like automation and AI and all of these things, and also the problems of today's politics, they all can be also engaged through the apparatuses which enable them. Let's say it like that, right? So be that the apparatus of image production, right? The online platforms that actually intensify that. But it's one thing to be a user, I think, to be someone who is always on the surface, to be someone who is always, but it's another thing to go behind the screen, the scenes, and try to actually do something. And I think an architect should try to. That's what I believe in, just simply as that. Go behind the screens, the scenes, and the screens. Okay. That was unplanned for. I didn't mean to be a buzzkill. I'm sorry about that, but
in my case, I would say, trying to think back to these very old student projects, I have to say that there was quite a bit of post-rationalizing done on the projects, because I can't say that I knew what I was doing at the time. I can say that there was an interest, there was, a little bit of intuition. I kind of remember what was going on at the time. At the time there were the LA riots, and so we were stuck at USC. They didn't want us to leave for about 2 days. We were kind of stuck in the school, and I remember that first project that I showed. We never really had a final review, and so. And there was a payphone at the school. So the instructors were calling the students on the payphone, asking how, like kind of helping us finish through the project without really having a final review. So, we were left to our own devices. We were left with ourselves, talking to each other, thinking about the projects with each other. And so I don't recall really having an idea about how I would have presented the project. Like I think we were a week away from the final review for that project. But in a way, like you may not have all the answers, right? When you're working on your thesis, you may not have any answers, but you could start to sort of frame the way you're thinking about things.
So I wonder with that, some things become opportunities. So, I mean, I think it was wonderful. At least I had a good day today. I saw a lot of models. Some were quite delicious. So, we do small steps, but can be, a bit, can carry more load. So with that, I don't know if you have any closing questions. Let me see, I saw the chat. I think it's all, yes. Very comforting. I have a good photo of you, Vincent. I'll send it to you at the entry of SCI-Arc. So thank you guys. Thank you for the presentations. And, I think it's always amazing to see the career arcs and the stories of those. Some are shorter. We can see the years in Zeina. Damjan also. And then some horrific photos that Shaki shown within a context, at least 2 photos. So again, you can see that sometimes you go back a few years with, some of the people that, that it's right here within this screen. So thank you guys. Thank you again. Remember, next year, there's no career day. Of course, we have miniatures. So we're going to take a kind of a 1 week break. Actually, Friday, we also don't have live chat, and we don't have Fridays at 5. So I hope everybody, so this is the last gathering. I can stay here for a few minutes for the students if you have any questions, or if you have issues that you want me to text the SCI-Arc team in regard to your models. So I'm going to stay here for a little bit. And then I hope you all have a great long weekend. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Florencia, so what is the format for the miniatures gonna be? As in, like, how are we exactly presenting?
So miniatures is a review, so Zoom.
Okay.
So you have individual presentations. It's going to be 20 minutes per student. And we have, I don't know, like some 40 guests.
40 guests?
Yes, more or less. They're all students, all people that graduate from SCI-Arc from the 80s to now, more or less. A lot of recent grads. And well, actually, from all over. I mean, it's quite a great. So the Natasha, you know Natasha, maybe Julian, I think that you guys contacted Natasha with Stan. She's doing a party at 6 o'clock. I think they're organizing some nice party and music. I don't know exactly. Zoom, you know, it's like, I mean, in here, but still. So the reviews is 2 segments. I'm going to send out the schedule. It's just that I got all the guests. Once the guests are set up, you know, I can put the guest and send it out to everybody. But it's 20 minutes per student. Ideally, I mean, you present as much as you like. I recommend 3 minutes, but that's my recommendation. If you use more time, then it's less for conversation. And, you know, so with the advisors, sometimes there's 2 advisors per group. It's 10 groups. We have 10 groups. And so it's a 10 to 1 and a 2 to 5. So it's 2 segments, like all the reviews with group leaders, but I think it's 9 students per session. So there's plenty of time for people to talk. And again, unless you are paired with somebody, you present individually. So you present from Zoom, like now, each one, there's no single platform. You just share your screen every time a student presents. So if you share your screen, if you want to do something like what Sean Cooper did, you want to switch to Twitch or something like that, then you have to prepare it. If you just share on your screen because you do a PowerPoint, you know, or you use whichever medium that you want to use.
I didn't, sorry for that. I didn't take pictures of my models. But like you guys like gonna be, I don't know, like I honestly didn't have time to do it. Like, are you?
Yes, you have the pictures on Monday.
Okay, thank you very much. Yes.
I don't know how much editing might be able to do, but the idea is the photographer, because there are less models than what we thought. So I think the photographer will finish earlier, meaning he was going to do it on July 3rd, today, tomorrow, and Friday. But it seems that, you know, he's not going to go to school on Friday, but the photograph will come back to you. So you can use them the idea is that you use them in your presentation.
Okay, okay.
The drone photos, I don't think, because I think that we'll use more for like an intro. Let's see how Koreitem does it, because Koreitem has Monday only to do it. So it's not that he has a lot of time for post-editing. That's more of a record and to show, but the photographer photos come back to you. You can show them in your presentation. So.
Okay. Okay, thank you, Florencia.
Unless something happens to the model, I think they were all fine. I saw your model. I took a photo of your model. I have a photo.
Yeah.
So I can. So yeah. So the models you saw there, they all have tape right now because the photos I took is before. Before the photographer. I didn't even see the photographer when I left. So, but I saw the paper. He had the paper. Wendy, did you choose? Did you change your confetti or not? Because you know we don't have confetti.
Yes, I have either lavender or red.
Okay.
I also put a note. Is Maria going to be there during?
Yes, she's there.
Okay, I put a note. Maria's discretion, like creative discretion. So I'm gonna have Maria choose.
Maria, I think she's going to ask the photographer to do the different sets in some models.
Okay.
And so you might have a lavender and a red.
Cool.
Like, so you can choose afterwards. I don't know how the photographer will do because he didn't want to be close to nobody.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that Maria had to go.
Oh, okay.
But Maria left a sticker on all the models with the color background. I mean, we had a whole team this morning, you know, it was like Gabriel receiving, then somebody was putting, you will find that all your models have a you know, we did a label maker has a label on the bottom. I try your model, Wendy, I mean, it moved a bit, so hopefully nothing moves. I took it out of the box, actually.
Did you use the straps? I put straps so you can take it out.
Oh, that's where I thought it looked like a wedding present or something like that. I mean, I didn't realize that. No, I took it out. I did it myself. Actually, Gabriel was doing a better job than me, so he did the other one. So, yes, no, I took it without the straps, but nothing happened anyway. So, but then somebody put the label maker, then they were set up by background. So it was a whole factory down there. So and then things will keep on arriving. So I think that we'll see. I think he's actually now photographing them. So Maria's going to send me photos of that setting. And then there's a cam that is filming all of this.
Hey, Florencia.
So, yeah.
Is there somebody?
Andrew.
Yeah, because I put my name tag, like the big stupid name tag, like right on the base of my model.
Yours the wood model, no?
Yeah, but like my name tag's like on it. So like
everybody put it like that.
I know.
You're not the only one.
Okay, good. Because I saw it in the Instagram. I was like, okay, good.
No, that's
cool.
I took those photos when they were arriving. So
I know. I'm just curious.
So everybody had a tag. They put it anywhere, and then we're just labeling them at the bottom.
Great.
And that will be like a more permanent in case, because when you pick them up on Tuesday, we'll put them in the table.
Yeah.
Hopefully we'll do, I don't know, Wendy, if we kind of nicely put it back like you did with the ribbons, and we'll put them back in the boxes. We keep the boxes, you know, and then you guys pick them up from the tables. Is Jessie here? I had a question. Yes. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, I had one too. So you said the photographer won't be there Friday. I think my model is going to be printing like midday the 2nd. So I just wanted to, I guess you already answered my question. But so photographer will stop after the 2nd.
I think that once he finished, he finished. Mm-hmm. He was hired to do 3 days, but then we have less because we had 80 models in mind, and then we have 40 something. So that's why he might. But email Maria. Maria is coordinating all our model, all the photographer stuff.
Okay.
So if there's a missing model, something, just tell her what is the ETA. Is that at school? Is that Rodney making it?
Yeah, because I'm not in LA, so it's going to be powder printed, and so it should be done tomorrow. But I think it might be later. I just don't know how long. That's the thing. It's
SCI-Arc, everybody comes in. Rodney was helping out, and there was like everybody was there. Okay. Social distancing, but so put Rodney and Maria and me in the email, and so they coordinate amongst each other.
Okay, we'll do. Okay, thank you.
So then Maria will try to, help out.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, I had a question. I know like the black initially in the catalog that you guys sent like had a white and a black. Is it completely black now, or is it still white and black? Okay.
Maria changed it and it's all black. Okay, because awesome. She said that there were more requests for full black, so she did it.
Okay, thank you.
Yes. Yes, I think it's all black. I think the only question was the concrete that some people asked. So I'm not sure that's possible. She was going to try to see if he could do it, maybe in the floor or something like that, but I don't think that we could do that. Shri, what kind of paper the background being printed on? I saw it today. She printed on the heavy bond from the print center. So it's a matte, heavy bond. Shri, do I see you? Ah, there you are. So it's not reflective and it's a single printout. So it's going to have no edge. You know what I mean? So like that. But I saw it rolled out. I didn't see it as a set. Okay, sure. Let me know if you have another question, but I'm waiting for her to send me the photos when this photographer starts working on it, but I don't see it yet. Okay, so Julian, you check, as I said, just follow up with an email and then let's see where that is.